I'll get started as more people are joining us, and I'm not the one you're here to hear from today. I want to welcome you to today's industry-specific public health update. Particularly, this session is meant for residential property owners or managers as well. I want to thank you for joining us today to learn the requirements necessary to make sure we're maintaining a safe community, especially as we have more people entering our community and housing themselves at our residential properties. I want to thank you for continuing to be a part of these, to ask your questions, and I will send out a follow-up email with any of the resources that are mentioned in today's in today's presentation. For those of you that have not been on a previous call, my name is Corinne Waldow. I'm with the Boulder Chamber, and we're happy here to be partnered here with Boulder County Public Health, the City of Boulder, and CU Boulder. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Lane Drager with Boulder County Public Health.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I also really want to thank our partners at the City of Boulder and the University of Colorado for joining us today to talk about this. We certainly have been hearing a lot of concerns within the community, and we've been really working together on trying to address how we handle COVID with all the different nuances of CU resuming, schools resuming, all the different capacity issues that we have. So again, appreciate all of them for taking time to join us. So I'm going to go first as public health. I'm going to give you an overview of kind of where things are at with COVID, and then our partners at the city and the university will also share some of the things that they've been doing, and at the end we'll have time for questions for folks. And again, as Corinne mentioned, we'll be sending out a whole bunch of resources afterwards too. So I'm going to jump into kind of where things are at. So we have a lot of data on our Boulder County website, but one of the things we track are kind of the new cases of COVID that we're seeing, just for trend analysis. So this is a 5-day average of the new cases that we're seeing. And as you can see that we had kind of the arrival of COVID, and we saw things increasing, and as things locked down, dramatically effective. And then as things reopened, things were doing all right. And then you can see the significant outbreak we had. And this one was really related to parties on the Hill, some of the protests and some of the marches and things like that. But how quickly things turned on us. Then we kind of got things back under control, and then we sort of saw July 4th and other activities throughout the summer where people's kind of vigilance at being safe really waned. But right now we're doing really well. We've seen this kind of marked downturn for the last week or two, and this is really important given obviously students arriving on campus, schools resuming with lots of childcare activities that will be happening. So certainly flu season coming up before we know it. So really we want to make sure we're staying ahead of things. We don't want to be in a spike position when we have all sorts of other factors happening. Another thing I want to share with you, you may have heard things talk about positivity rates or the percentage of people that are positive. So what that really is talking about is of the people that are being tested to see if they have COVID, what percentage of them are positive. So across the country, this is a widely variable number. Boulder County is doing incredibly well. You can see our numbers are trending down, which is absolutely something we want to see. We do anticipate some potential spike. The university, being incredibly proactive, is testing a whole bunch of students all at once. So we do expect to see some positives come out of that. And many students aren't all from Colorado. So some of the states that they're coming from have even higher rates. So we are planning for that, as is the university. So prepared for that. The other real important demographic of why we're kind of talking today that we really want to share with you is this is the number of people who've tested positive by age groups. So I know that there's different misinformation out there. So we always really want to drive you to our website, the CDC, the state health department. But most people are saying this is really only affecting the elderly. And certainly when we look at the severity of illness, that is a true statement. When you look at our cases, how many people have been fatal, the people that died from COVID, that is definitely in older demographics. But this is the biggest bar right here, this 20 to 29-year-olds. that is the most significant number of people who've been identified as positive. And not only is it just the overall highest number, when we really look at kind of this next slide, which is now sort of a rate. So of the people who are actually of that age, how many of them are testing positive? So you can again see that now that demographic is by far the highest number. So we certainly would expect that the highest, as people are getting older, we're expecting to see probably more people in that demographic testing positive, but we're seeing that really still the highest is that 20 to 29-year-old range. So just want to let you know where things are at. We've seen a number of iterations of public health orders related to COVID, to the point where it's probably driven most people crazy, and we've appreciated the chamber for helping us continue to share where things are at. But we've had a little bit of stability for a few weeks now, but we did get a ninth revision to Safer at Home, and that's where we currently are standing in Boulder County. So we are following all the state orders. We don't have our own Safer at Home orders. The only things that are that we do have locally are mask orders. So there is a statewide mask order that was extended for another month that applies for indoor spaces. But within Boulder County, we have a whole host of municipal orders and a county order that also addresses outdoor spaces. So just to kind of recover that, our statewide order was extended for another 30 days. Our countywide order is in place indefinitely until we feel it's no longer necessary. But as you can see, Louisville, Lafayette, Erie, Superior, and Boulder all also have local face covering orders, so that you are now addressing both outdoor and indoor spaces under both the county and the municipal orders. And that's probably the biggest driver that we're going to be talking about today of what applies to property owners and their residences, is that mask use as well as social distancing. So just to kind of clarify the age requirements. So this is really all the adults for sure, but it is impacting school age kids as well. All public spaces for indoors, and then certainly outdoors when you cannot socially distance. So that means you can't stay 6 feet away and you're not with people that are from your own household. So those are important distinctions. But public spaces, when we're thinking of residential properties, this would include lobby areas, this would include your laundry facilities, all those spaces that are not the actual residence itself. So any of those other spaces, garage spaces, are all considered public spaces. These are all hyperlinks, so as Corinne sends out resources, you can get the state mask guidance. The other kind of big important guidances are related to events, I guess related to properties. So any people that are hosting any kind of events, they are going to need to comply with all these requirements. And then the space calculator, that's really looking at when people are around each other, that they're giving each other adequate space. So certainly as people have any kind of congregations in their backyards or on the outdoor spaces, on the properties you own and maintain, we're going to want to make sure that there is adequate space for people to social distance. And so this space calculator hyperlink can help walk people through what number of people is appropriate to still maintain that kind of social distancing. And just to give you a frame of reference, when we talk about social distancing, that's meaning everybody is staying at least 6 feet apart, as well as then essentially wearing masks. But when we're talking about how much space that really takes, if everybody's standing 6 feet apart, the only way for them to stay 6 feet apart is them to move in complete unison together, where everybody moves forward together, everybody moves backward together. So in reality, the way for people to actually have an event or be outdoors or even indoors and maintain social distancing, they need a lot more space than that, so that any person can walk around and between other people without having to violate anyone else's kind of social distance space. So that's really what that social distancing calculator helps people get an idea of what's an appropriate number that we're not going to have a lot of problems. And that's really what we're here to talk about today, is avoiding those problems that could lead to further enforcement. We're trying to be as proactive as we can to avoid all of that. So these are going to be tools that can help people be successful. This disease is not really new as far as what it takes to prevent it. Public health has basic things that we wish everyone would do all the time. These are the things that prevent flu and almost every other respiratory illness that we deal with. Washing your hands, physically distancing, wearing masks, that would always have helped in the past, but it's never been a social norm. It's now sort of a requirement to hopefully make it more of a social norm. And then people monitoring your health. When you're ill, stay away from the people and really make sure that you're isolating. So those are the same messages we've had for a long time on most diseases, and they're the same things that will really help us in addressing COVID. The other things related to our community is that we have the facial covering orders, the mask orders. We do have these other public health orders to address how businesses are being run. And certainly for managing properties, this is where you have that need to make sure those public spaces, those high touch surfaces are cleaned and disinfected on a regular basis. Certainly if there's bathrooms that are public access bathrooms, those need to be cleaned very regularly. And these are things we do get complaints on from properties of, hey, they're not managing any of our spaces, you know, they're not taking care of these kind of things. So again, staying active and proactive on things helps us avoid hearing the complaints and having to try to work with you to determine what's going on. We've been doing a lot of information sharing, again, through our partners with the chambers, and all these things are recorded. So all these webinars that we've done are shared for later times. We've been doing a lot of interpretation and sharing that information with folks. We are, though, not here to be your legal counsel, but we are giving as much information as we can related to the orders. But unfortunately, if we can't see that compliance through proactive steps, we do have an enforcement role. So that's what, again, we're here to proactively talk to you about to try to avoid, and again, have our partners on the call as well to talk about all the resources and steps that they're taking. But again, some of the components of their programs that may come into play should we not see good compliance. And then again, these hyperlinks to the state health department's website and our website, which there's a plethora of information and resources. We continue to host webinars for business sectors. And like today, the special session that the chamber put on was specifically for those property managers. We've also been doing Spanish webinars for folks. And how you can reach us, we have a couple of different ways. We have our own dedicated business email address. So that's a way that you can reach out to our team. We also, as a county, have a call center. This is where most of our complaints are being driven to, that then make it to our team. And we are collectively sharing what we hear with the university as well as with the city of Boulder. So that's all I have for now. We're going to hold questions to the end so you get a chance to hear from our other partners. If John is joined, I'll turn things over to John Berglund with the city of Boulder.
Thanks, Lane. Yeah, I'm going to try to get my PowerPoint up here. Just a second. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that now. So my name is John Berglund. I'm the co-compliance supervisor for planning development services with the city of Boulder. And I am the code enforcement officer that's overseeing enforcement of the nuisance abatement ordinance in the cities of Boulder, Boulder Revised Code. That's chapter 10-2.5.
Hey, John, I don't know if we're seeing your screen. I don't.
Are you not seeing it?
Is it projecting? Okay.
Nope, you're not up yet. You want to make sure you select it and press share. There you go.
Did it load this time?
Yep.
There we go.
Thanks.
So there you have it. So on the call today, I'm joined with Phil Volpe, who's our city prosecutor that's also working on nuisance abatement cases, and Sandra Yanes who's our deputy city attorney supporting us as well. So first question is, what is a public nuisance? So basically, it's a violation that annoys community members in the vicinity of a parcel or a property. So it's noise, it's loud parties, accumulation of trash, things like that that can cause a nuisance in a neighborhood and to the neighbors. We look at them as a combined incident if they're within a 24-hour period. So if there's multiple calls within a 24-hour period, that counts as one public nuisance incident. And according to our ordinance, a nuisance abatement process may be started if 2 or more incidents occur within a 12-month period, or if 3 or more incidents occur within a 24-month period. So that's when we have the option to initiate a nuisance abatement case. We may not always initiate a nuisance abatement case. The intent of the ordinance is to disrupt a pattern of behavior. So if incidents, based on the details of the incidents themselves, if they're not showing egregious behavior or an ongoing pattern, we may pursue just addressing those with police enforcement or more direct enforcement actions instead of a nuisance abatement process. We're using nuisance abatement in this way because the city has an emergency order that adjusted the ordinance so that public health violations are actually considered nuisance incidents in addition to the other standard nuisance behavior that were previously identified, like noise, nuisance parties, things of that sort. So what is not a nuisance incident? So a public nuisance is something that has to bother the public. A law enforcement officer, for example, is not considered a member of the public. So if it's an officer-initiated event that was addressed by a standard patrol, things like that, that does not qualify. It has to be a public complaint that identifies it as a nuisance incident. Traffic offenses, those are things that happen in the right-of-way. Those are excluded. Offenses in which a community member at a property is the victim. So if someone is at a property that is in need of medical assistance or a police response, things like that, and someone calls for assistance to that property, that's again not someone else, a different member of the public calling in a complaint. That's a request for help. That's not a nuisance incident. In red here, I've put any violations that are first reported to the city by an owner or lessee of the property or under contractual obligation to manage the property, so property manager. So if someone responsible for the property is calling in a complaint to stop some nuisance behavior at a property, that is also not considered a nuisance incident. You're taking responsibility for property you are responsible for. And we look for any incident to be substantiated with corroborating evidence. So, if we receive complaints and they're not corroborated with something more substantial than just a call log, that's probably not going to be considered for a nuisance incident. We want a little more information. So the procedure for this, quickly going over these steps. The first step is notice. So a written notice will be sent to the owner and is usually sent also to any property managers identified or local agents for the property. That notice provides warning that there's a pattern of nuisance behavior at this property and some action is required to correct that pattern of behavior. Okay, so I put a note in here, if no additional complaints are received past that notice, then there's no progression in the nuisance abatement case. So the point of the case is to stop a pattern of behavior. If we don't continue to receive complaints, there's no additional action taken for nuisance abatement. If we do receive additional complaints, the second step would be a mandatory settlement meeting. And that's a meeting where we would require everyone with an interest in the property, the owner, local agent, tenants, to meet with the city and discuss the problems that are occurring and basically agree on a contract to establish certain steps that are going to be taken to prevent additional incidents. If that meeting's unsuccessful and additional incidents continue to occur, the city attorney has the opportunity then to evaluate the case and determine if it needs to go forward into a court action for an injunctive type order to prevent additional incidents from occurring. Okay. So the big question is, if you get notified about nuisance problems at your property, what can you do about it? So the first thing that always should be done, and that is required to be done by city ordinance, is the operator of a rental property must notify the tenants that you've been served notice of nuisance incidents at your property. Okay, that is a requirement of the Boulder Revised Code, section 12.2.4, that you have to disclose that not only to the current tenants, but if the case continues through a turnover at the property, that disclosure needs to be provided to the incoming tenants as well, so that everyone living at the property is aware that the property is in nuisance abatement. Okay. So written communication is best to confirm compliance with this code, but a verbal discussion with the tenants is proven to be very impactful. And some suggested talking points are just establishing an expectation that the tenants must prevent incidents related to noise, parties, violations of public health orders, which is the current state, and trash and other nuisances, things that would generate a public complaint. The program is not looking to hold these tenants to any unique standards. It's simply expected that they follow the standard laws regarding noise limitations, maintaining clean property without trash, and not letting gatherings get out of control. Again, I want to emphasize that if a tenant or guest needs help from police or fire department, they should not hesitate to call. That will never be held against anyone at the property for calls for help. So that should always be stressed with the tenants, that if they need police or fire, that they should call for help. Okay, so additional suggestions. These are not code requirements, but they're helpful suggestions. Monitoring the property is a good step. I highlighted before that if an owner or a property manager or lessee of the property calls in a complaint to stop nuisance behavior that's maybe going on at the property, that is not held against you in a nuisance abatement case. What I want to stress with that is you have to identify yourself so we know it was someone associated with the property, an interest in the property on the call. If you remain anonymous on the call and we can't connect that to you, then that it may appear that should be contributed as a nuisance incident in the course of a nuisance abatement case. So identify yourself, please, if you're calling in while monitoring your own property. If your tenants are students attending CU, you can contact CU Boulder. There's some representatives from CU Boulder on the call here tonight that will hopefully go into some more information on this, but they are willing to contact the tenants that may be students and follow up with them and support preventing additional nuisance behavior at the property. So there is some contact information there for reaching out to CU Boulder if your tenants are students at the university. And then finally contact me at the city to discuss what's happening, and we can go into details on it and try to come up with remedies or solutions to avoid any additional incidents at the property. I want to emphasize that the point of this ordinance is to provide you notice that something is occurring at the property that is causing a nuisance to the community, and that provides an opportunity for you to communicate with the city and develop a relationship so that we can seek solutions without having to go into further enforcement, hopefully. So I encourage anyone with questions to reach out with me. I do prefer email, but my phone number is there as well.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. And as we mentioned, all these slides will be shared, so these contact information will be included in all of that. I'm going to turn it over to our other colleague, Daniel Easton from the University of Colorado, and he's going to share some of what CU's been up to.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here tonight. And I think we're really excited that we've been kind of working a lot together this summer with a lot of our partners. So first, we're really glad to be here. And so what I'm hoping to go over today is just some of the things we've done ahead of the time for the year, so you kind of know how we're supporting our students before, and then also how we can work with you if you do have properties that are creating some problems in the Boulder community. So the first thing I want to chat about is sort of our policy around sort of public health orders. And we did update our University Code of Conduct to include specific prohibitions against violations of public health orders. So all of those things that Lane had talked about the existing public health orders in the County of Boulder, those are all things that are also enforceable under the Code of Student Conduct. And the way we've written the code is that basically students have to comply with the public health order, the most strict public health order of the area they're under. So we know that the state has put in some mandates, but Boulder County has some more specific requirements. And so if someone's in the city of Boulder or the county of Boulder, they're going to have to follow the Boulder County regulations, even if they're more strict than the state regulations. And so that gives us some teeth to enforce our code in an off-campus environment, even if they're not following those public health orders in their homes. Ahead of the addition with that, Jonathan talked about the importance of folks calling for help if there's someone who needs help at a property. And we've also updated our amnesty provision to where if there's like an emergency and someone calls for help, we would still, under our amnesty provision, we would still do an educational dialogue with students if there were violations of policy occurring at that property, but we wouldn't do a formal disciplinary case because we do want folks to do the right thing and call for help. And so just like the city wants to encourage you to have your tenants call for help if they're victims, we also want to encourage students to call for help if they are victims of a crime. And then knowing that we would still take an educational approach to any policy violations that were occurring during that time. With that policy, we've done quite a bit of pre-education with students. And so every single CU student was required before they were able to participate in their classes this fall to participate in a course related to COVID-19 and public health orders. This class included information about some of the health information about COVID, the risks of spread, to try to help minimize some of the myths that are out there around sort of COVID, trying to sort of provide the best information about why we have these policies. And then it also included information about our policies so students understood what the expectations would be when they're on campus and off campus. Additionally, Lane had mentioned testing, and so we are testing all incoming freshmen who are living in the residence halls for COVID before they move into the residence halls. And so I think that is a good way for us to try to catch possible positive tests before they continue in the community. And we do have quarantine spaces for on-campus students that they are moved to if we do have a positive test. I think when it comes to sort of the process, John talked about the importance of contacting us, particularly as it pertains to the nuisance abatement process. So we are continuing to get reports from Boulder Police if there are citations that occur on properties, and we're already sort of adjudicating violations of the Code of Student Conduct in that case. However, we also know that there's cases where folks aren't given a citation, but there might be a referral for the nuisance abatement process. And I think this is where we can really partner with you to take action if you get that first notification. So when you provide that written notification to your tenants, feel free to contact us because there's a number of ways we can partner. First, at a minimum, we're going to review the information that we have about that case to determine if there's enough information for us to do a student conduct case and hold them responsible through that code. even if it's the case where there isn't sufficient information to provide due process, the fact that we have a report, we're still going to outreach to those properties for an educational dialogue to talk about the policies, what the possible consequences will be, and support resources to help them figure out what do they need to change about their behavior at their property so that they don't continue. I think that's where hearing from you all as property managers is going to be really important, because we can partner with you in this. So even in your communication with your tenants, let's say you wanted to require them to participate in some sort of educational dialogue with CU as part of your expectations, we can partner with you on that. And so please reach out to us, and we are happy to be an effective partner with you as you sort of figure out how you want to also alter the behavior of your tenants. When it comes to the conduct process and it comes to sanctioning, our philosophy right now is that depending on the severity of the situation, generally we're going to start with an educational approach. We've partnered with our restorative justice program and our health promotions office to create specific educational sanctions using methodologies that are shown to alter behavior in this age group. And then additionally, we've worked with the Boulder Municipal Court so that if someone is referred to the court for a violation of a public health order, that they are referring those students to our sanctions as well. So we have partnerships with the court to make sure there's congruence between what we're holding folks accountable for educationally and what the court is. Certainly, if a situation is severe enough, or if someone has frequent violations, there is a possibility that we would suspend students from CU for violations of those policies. We don't typically start there because we also understand that if we do suspend them from CU, they're probably still going to live in the property. They have a lease there, and like we would rather be able to try to take steps to hold them accountable and alter that behavior before we get to the point where they would we would have no more ability to hold them accountable after a suspension. And so we want to start with education, but know that the separation could be a possibility. So with that, there's also some additional educational efforts that are going on that Jeff's team is also taking the lead on. So I'll pass it to Jeff to talk about his office and what they're doing around this as well.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks folks for having us. My name is Jeff Morris. I'm the Director for Off-Campus Housing and Neighborhood Relations at CU. Daniel did a great job of just summarizing all of the new things that we are focusing on and partnering with and getting ready to kind of implement as the semester begins, or it already has begun for many students. Some of the educational outreach, kind of proactive efforts that we've really been focusing on in our office are based around, I would say, the biggest challenge that we're finding with something like nuisance abatement that's becoming a little bit more adamant in specific areas in Boulder. More specifically, the Hill. For those of you that have properties on the Hill is where we see the majority of concerns and challenges. But again, the biggest challenge for us is the fact that with students returning back to campus, students moving off campus for the first time that were first-year students last year, a lot of these students have never heard of nuisance abatement. They don't know what nuisance abatement is. They don't know what that means, and they don't know what could happen. They don't know the repercussions. They don't know the process. So a lot of folks, I've been walking the Hill probably every other day talking to students, and as people are moving in, we continue to have programs and efforts on the Hill and Beach Park. And the conversations that we're hearing is that, you know, none of the students have heard of such a program. So for us, a lot of folks are coming back under the assumption that things are going to be exactly the same way that they've been for years in the past. And I speak specifically for the social aspect of our students when living on the Hill. So, you know, any day of the week, I'm sure many of you know, if you were to walk up and down these neighborhoods, you're going to see many beer pong tables, 10, 15 students hanging out, doing their thing. Yesterday, I was walking by and parents were helping students moving in, and they were drinking with their students and playing beer pong out in their front yard. And so this is just kind of a microcosm as the majority of students are starting to come back this week and next. So for us, the biggest challenge is educating the students that this is a thing, that this is going to be a different year in Boulder. This is going to be a different experience for the students, and they're having a hard time understanding that. So one of our efforts has been working with many different property management companies to work on resources that you can share with your tenants directly, whether or not when they move in or after a week of moving in or whenever you have the resources available. We've talked to a couple different property management companies that have their own resources that have been great, that have talked about public health orders, talked about nuisance abatement, what these things mean, the repercussions, and things are starting to get a little bit more serious for those folks that didn't fully understand what a program like this actually looks like. Beyond that, one of our outreach efforts is Daniel had mentioned when we received tickets or complaints, we're able to kind of have conversations with those students. One of the more common interactions that we have with our neighbors is just a general email or phone call complaint that I'm going to get, Friday and Saturday at 2 o'clock in the morning. And what's challenging with these complaints is that neighbors, they know the address of where the nuisance is coming from, but they don't necessarily know the student tenant names. So for CU to move forward with a process through our conduct, we would technically need to know those student names. So in situations where we don't know who the student names are and we receive a complaint from a neighbor, we'll actually be sending a snail mail letter directly to the address that we have on file that talks about the violations that were discussed in the actual complaint. And it'll have support systems in there saying, if you have any questions, please reach out to CU. Sometimes the students reach out without knowing that we don't know their names, and that's a really easy way to figure that out. But the other ask that we've been working with a lot of property managers, and it really helps us, is that you will also be getting a notification from the institution that says, hey, your tenants received this violation. It will be attached or this letter, so you can see the violations in that letter when we send you a notification. At that point, we just want to have a conversation. What are those next steps that landlords and property managers can take with their students? If they receive a second complaint, there is another letter that goes out and another notification to the property manager with a formal request asking for the student tenant names of that address. And once we have those student tenant names of that address is when we can take that into a more formal conversation, whether or not through our office or through Daniel's office. So we've appreciated everyone's efforts in cooperation and collaboration and being able to share student tenant names. For us, that's one of the bigger challenges on how to kind of really target this educational moment. So we appreciate that effort. The other piece that Daniel had mentioned that I can't say more enough about is whenever you're receiving a notification either from municipal court about a ticket happening at your property or a nuisance abatement notification from John's office, we want to know about that. We want to know where we can help and where we can assist. I would say when this first started back in July, the biggest question we were getting from property managers was, well, what can I do? How do I hold my students accountable? The lease right now doesn't necessarily say this or say that, and we're in the middle of it. And so those are questions that we want to be able to answer and be able to help you out with when those questions come up. How can CU get involved? Right now, we have a neighborhood ambassador program, which is our student leaders. When we receive a complaint on an address, these student leaders are physically going to these houses and having conversations with these students that received a complaint. With that, some property managers have taken upon themselves to actually call the tenants directly, have conversations about the complaint, about the violations, and they've taken it even a step further, which you've seen be very successful. And this isn't for everyone, but at that point, when you are contacting your tenants, we also recommend that you're contacting the co-signers on that lease as well. At that point, the majority of the time, those co-signers are going to end up being a parent or a guardian. And when mom and dad are figured out that there's violations and their students have been a little bit of a nuisance in the neighborhood and it's coming from the individual that owns the property their students are living in, it turns the situation into a much more real situation. Just a recommendation, it's certainly not a requirement, but we can say that we have seen it be extremely successful on a number of properties so far. Beyond that, I would say if anyone is a member of the Boulder Area Rental Housing Association right now, or you'd like to explore their services, they currently are putting together a new addendum that will be in leases that is in reference to nuisance abatement and what that looks like, how they can hold their student tenants a little bit more accountable, and what the repercussions might be from the landlord rather than the city and rather than the CU. The idea here is that if we can get the communication efforts, the educational efforts, the messaging to stay consistent, but it's coming from 3 different parties, from the city, from the school, and from the property manager directly to that tenant, odds are that message is finally going to get across. So we're hoping that we can partner with this language, with these resources. Our office, our goal on Friday morning is to go live on colorado.edu/offcampus with a complete landlord and property manager resource toolkit. So this is going to be a toolkit that has all of the information that we share directly with our students when it comes to public health orders, nuisance abatement, living off campus, how to be a good community member, to everything from trash, recycling, fire safety, et cetera. So you're going to see exactly what the students are actually receiving directly from CU, so we can continue that consistent messaging. That way it helps, we feel like, in a way where you can reference back to those materials that you know the students received, and you can talk about those documents kind of in a collaborative effort with those student tenants. So that should hopefully be up and running within the next couple of days. The property managers and landlords that we work with directly at CU will be getting an email from us, which will include a letter from our Dean of Students that also talks a lot about what is going on and what we plan to do this semester. But the idea here is for all of these stakeholders to be as open and as communicative as possible, as this is really going to be the only way that we can handle things. I think I'm excited for the school year to start, but at the same time, I'm a little anxious. I think the past month or so, we've seen little pockets of microcosms of what certain neighborhoods are going to look like and what students are really going to do once they get here. And so I'm hoping with the efforts of all the stakeholders that are involved with this process are going to be able to at least curtail that. And again, going back to my first point, the biggest challenge right now is getting this knowledge, getting this education into the hands of the students so they understand the severity of the current situation in Boulder and what that situation is going to look like moving forward into the school year when living off campus. I don't have a lot more than that, but always happy to chat. I know John had my contact info in his slideshow. Daniel and I work very closely, and we're probably going to be working more closely than ever this semester. But it's all of these collaborative efforts that we really, really, really appreciate. And we've already seen start to work for certain properties that we would never think would be a quiet property for quite some time. So there's a lot of promise in what we're doing, and we just need to kind of continue those efforts with the help of the individuals who own those properties and manage those properties. Always open for questions at the end as well. I'm not sure if there's anyone after me, Lane, but I will send it back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll turn it back to anyone else that hasn't had a chance to speak, Sandra or Philip, if there's any other pieces that you wanted to add before we take any questions.
I'm here to answer any questions anybody might have, but I think John did a great job presenting our information and was very thorough. And we're just super excited that we're able to collaborate with so many great partners here today, and look forward to hopefully a successful, safe semester.
And I just second that.
Thank you both. Corinne, any questions that have come in or?
So I guess this question might be for you, Jeff. You talked a little bit about best practices in, sending that letter to the co-signers or the, others on the lease. Do you have any have you heard of any best practices on how to communicate up front with people moving in as to what are going to be required of them? And, is that going to be that website that you're talking about, or are there other best practices you've seen since July?
For us, that's a great question. For us, best practices have really been peer-to-peer engagement through our student leaders. And so we are always open to have those communications and to have those engagements on behalf of the property manager. But that being said, we are always more than happy to provide property managers, landlords, whoever would like to have a conversation with their tenants with what we call our welcome bags and our welcome kits for students that are moving into their new homes. So for example, this bag includes all of those resources that I had just talked about in physical form, and just having something that you can physically hand to a student or student tenants always allows that conversation to be a little bit more engaging. Plus it's you providing information to your student tenants directly, which is fantastic. So we're always more than happy to make up, as many bags as someone might want. If it's a complex with 200 apartments in it, we'll get it done. If it's a house with 3 tenants in it, we'll get it done. Just feel free to connect with me. We can get some bags organized and get them out to those neighborhoods. And again, our staff can hand them off if you have a particular house that you'd like that information to go to, or if you would like to meet up at some point in Boulder, we can always get the bags to you as well to be delivered.
And Corinne, I think your point is definitely what I think all of us would like to see is landlords being as proactive as they can. Not waiting for problem tenants to show up, is just proactively reaching out to your tenants and encouraging them to look at these resources, really understand. We're not telling people not to enjoy themselves, that they can't ever have parties or have fun, but we're really going to be concerned about these really large blowouts where we've got tons of people that are not able to social distance and not wearing masks. They're also going to get attraction from their neighbors. As the louder it gets, the more, problematic they become as neighbors. That's going to draw the attention of law enforcement as well as code enforcement. So it's really just being respectful neighbors, especially for folks that are moving into areas, that they haven't lived in before. It's part of their growth too, is, nobody's telling them not to have fun, but be respectful and be a good neighbor. And certainly take your responsibility of preventing this disease. Again, they're not immune to this. In fact, they're the demographic that is most impacted right now as far as overall disease.
So Lane, just another question real quick about what are there any requirements for residential property managers in the outbreak area? What is considered an outbreak, and are there any reporting requirements? What falls under that?
No, as far as for their tenants, that's not something that they're going to be held responsible for. I think that would be more on the side of if they have their own office spaces and their own staff that they do manage, that would be an instance where we would be looking to talk to them, and then they may have some requirements there. But for their tenants specifically, if they have multiple properties they manage, we would be doing our work to do investigations and trying to make linkages. So that might be something we would share with them, that, hey, it looks like multiple properties have come together to throw these parties, and if it's impacted a lot of people and they happen to own more than one of the properties. As we mentioned before, we intend to share across all of the different partners here. So we definitely want to make sure we get that information back to those landlords. So whether it comes to public health, we're going to share that with those landlords. We're also going to share it with CU. We're going to share it with the city of Boulder. So we intend to make sure everybody is well coordinated and in the know, so that those landlords are hearing all this and can hopefully help to address their tenants' responsibility to follow the law. Ultimately, that can escalate, which is what we're all trying to avoid.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks. One thing I forgot to mention, but Lane, you had reminded me as you were answering that question, is another important resource that I wanted to make sure folks were aware of is we've been developing what we're calling a roommate COVID agreement. Originally, we were working with Barha in order to have this be somewhat of an addendum to leases. And then it got a little messy just as far as how leases are handled with so many different property management companies. But we will have a resource available that's basically guidelines for the student tenants for anything and everything related to COVID, as far as social distancing, what were to happen if a student felt ill, tested positive, how do they isolate, how do they quarantine, how do they keep their space safe? Are they still responsible for rent if they're quarantining outside of the apartment? Are they responsible for utilities? So things that students are going to have questions about when these things happen. So we basically created this, it's an agreement that isn't, legally binding per se, but it's something that the student tenants can utilize in order to build their COVID game plan if things were to happen. So that resource is going to be available with the packet of resources as well that we're going to be sharing with both students and landlords. But if this is a resource that you think might be a great addition to leases that you already have in place as a possible addendum or just an additional document, certainly let me know, reach out directly, and we can get you a copy of that as well. It's a really great resource that I think has some really just sets the grounds for the semester as far as how the students are going to interact with, let's say, visitors, other roommates. What is their social gathering policy for the house going to be? We really want them to be intentional with thinking about these things before the semester really kicks off.
Wow, you pretty much answered a lot of questions. I think your presentations were very robust. One last thing, I think it's more of an information question. Maybe Lane and some others could talk about this, but what is happening between Boulder County Public Health and CU about contact tracing, about what are the efforts being put forth to make sure that any positive cases are identified early and that you can stop the spread?
Yeah, so I think Daniel talked about that CU's been proactive to test those new students. So to first off identify new arrivals to our community and then have plans for isolation for those folks that may test positive. we have a memorandum of understanding with the university. So they have built a robust internal capacity to do case investigation and contact tracing. So should they start to see positives come up, that they have additional capacity, so it won't be on Boulder County Public Health. So we've been working and planning for those efforts for quite some time. So we know this is a whole nother population within the city of Boulder that takes additional management. So the university's been planning for a lot of these activities. So there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that I think are in place. They haven't been put to the test yet. So that's the big challenge. Is we certainly don't want to overwhelm these systems and don't want to test them to their maximum capacity. So we're still all very focused on that proactive piece. As we would love to not have to see them engage all the people that they may have ready to stand up. That would be great if we don't have to use a lot of these programs that we've planned for. But that being said, we're still expecting, just based on the total number of people here, people are going to test positive. The chances of 0%, positive from all the people tested is just unlikely. So we're prepared for that event. It doesn't necessarily mean we're in a catastrophic place. So I know the general community and maybe even some of the landlords are really worried about that, but we are expecting people to get ill. We're not trying to get to 0% here. So we're prepared for a level of illness. It's really that exponential growth that we don't want to see. And so that's where it starts to spill over well into our community and has long-lasting impacts. Again, we've seen universities across the country that opened and closed fairly quickly. And so CU does not want to be in that situation. So the landlords have a role that they can help facilitate. And I know we've focused pretty heavily on the city of Boulder, because obviously that's where the university is located and the vast majority of students will be housed. But some of these pieces do extend throughout our county. So other landlords that may have issues, certainly not just CU. It's not exclusive to CU students to spread this disease. So large parties in general are a problem. Other municipalities also have similar orders and powers as the city of Boulder does. So we want to work with all those folks collectively, whether or not they're students. That obviously would mean CU doesn't need to be involved. But again, we really want to make sure that we have resources out to all the landlords that are out there and make sure that their tenants are being responsible. I think Labor Day is another milestone that has a lot of people worried, is another sort of potential party weekend that, again, now CU students will be around for. So again, those are big flags that we've seen. Memorial Day and July 4th both had some impacts across Colorado. So Labor Day is likely to have some of that potential as well.
All right. We don't have any more questions, but if anybody has any more last comments, I just want to say that I love working in a community where we're coming together like this to protect the herd. And I think people are going to see that all over Boulder. I think CU's worked with city and economic developers and chambers to get that message that we're here to protect our herd. And we can continue to do that as the landlords, and so that we can keep our city open and continue to operate, have students stay here, attend classes. So let's continue to protect that herd. Does anybody have any last minute thoughts? I will send out an email with a recording of this along with some additional information. In that email, I'll also put the Spanish language version of what the public health requirements are. It's a video that we do every week that may be useful to give to as a communication method as well. So we look forward to continue to work with businesses, send emails and questions to Daniel and Jeff and John and Lane, and just make sure that you're getting your questions answered. And we look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Appreciate your time.